Behind ordinary walls, Britain's most depraved couple buried their victims and family secrets. 12 young women vanished into the West family home, never to emerge alive again. In the quiet streets of Gloucester, a 3-story Victorian house harboured unspeakable secrets for over 2 decades. Behind its ordinary facade, Fred and Rosemary West committed acts of such profound depravity that investigators were left stunned. What began as a search for a missing teenager would uncover a killing ground where at least 12 young women and girls had been tortured, murdered, and buried. The house at 25 Cromwell Street appeared normal from the outside, but within its walls, a reign of terror had unfolded, one that combined sexual sadism, family abuse, and cold-blooded murder in ways that would shock the nation and forever change how Britain viewed the concept of evil hiding in plain sight. Before we continue our journey into the horrific crimes at 25 Cromwell Street, where Fred and Rose West turned an ordinary home into Britain's most notorious house of horrors, I want to welcome you to X by X Confidential. As we've seen, what began as an investigation into a missing teenager led detectives to uncover a 2-decade killing spree that shocked the nation. Here at X by X Confidential, we explore history's most notorious criminal investigations with forensic precision and respect for the victims. Now, let's return to Gloucester, 1994, as investigators begin the grim task of excavating the garden at Cromwell Street, unaware of the full horror they're about to discover. In the rolling hills of Gloucestershire, England, a terrifying secret was about to be unearthed. On February 24, 1994, Detective Constable Hazel Savage led a team of officers to 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester with a search warrant. They weren't looking for evidence of murder, they were investigating claims of child abuse. But what they would discover beneath the garden and concrete floors would shock the entire nation. Frederick Walter Stephen West was born on September 29, 1941, in the small village of Muchmarcle, Herefordshire. His parents, Walter and Daisy West, were poor farm workers who lived in Bickerton Cottage. Fred was one of 8 children in a cramped home with no electricity, heated only by a log fire. The West family moved to Moorcourt Cottage on the outskirts of Muchmarcle in 1946, where Fred's father worked as a milking herdsman and harvest hand. At school, Fred's classmates remembered him as scruffy, dim, and constantly in trouble. He left school at 15 in December 1956, barely able to read or write, and began working as a labourer at Moorcourt Farm. Though he struggled academically, Fred showed skill in woodwork and artwork, traits that would later help him renovate the houses where he hid his victims' bodies. The first sign of Fred's dangerous sexual behaviour emerged in June 1961, when his 13-year-old sister Kitty told their mother that Fred had been raping her since December 1960 and had gotten her pregnant. When police arrested 19-year-old Fred, he showed no remorse, simply asking, "Doesn't everybody do it?" He was tried on November 9 at Herefordshire Assizes, but the case collapsed when Kitty refused to testify. Fred's family effectively disowned him, and his mother banished him from their home. By September 1962, 21-year-old Fred reconnected with Catherine Chatrina Bernadette Costello, a woman he had previously dated. Rena was pregnant by another man, a Pakistani bus driver, when she married Fred in Ledbury on November 17, 1962. Fred's younger brother John was the only guest at the ceremony. The couple initially lived with Fred's aunt, before moving to Coatbridge, Scotland, where Fred worked as an ice cream van driver. In March 1963, Rena's daughter Charmaine was born. To explain the child's mixed ancestry, Fred and Rena claimed Rena had suffered a miscarriage and they had adopted Charmaine. The family relocated to Savoy Street in Glasgow's Bridgerton district, where in July 1964, Rena gave birth to their daughter Anna Marie in their home. Life in the West household was already showing disturbing patterns. Fred treated the children harshly, keeping the girls in the bottom of a bunk bed with bars fitted between the bunks, effectively caging them. They were only allowed out when Fred was at work. Through their nanny, Issa McNeil, the Wests became acquainted with 16-year-old Anne McFall, who was grieving the death of her boyfriend in a workplace accident. On November 4, 1965, Fred accidentally ran over and killed a small boy with his ice cream van in Glasgow. Though cleared of wrongdoing, he feared reprisals from locals and in December moved with Charmaine and Anna Marie to England, settling in a caravan at the Timberland Caravan Park in Bishop's Cleeve near Gloucester. Rena, McNeil and McFall joined them in February 1966, all crowding into Fred's caravan. Fred found work driving a lorry for a local abattoir. By early 1966, Fred's violent and controlling behavior was escalating. He physically abused Rena, McNeil, and even young Charmaine. Neighbors witnessed his violent outbursts, and his sexual demands became increasingly sadistic. He also began sexually abusing Charmaine, and encouraged Rena to engage in prostitution. In July 1967, 18-year-old Anne McFall, now 8 months pregnant with Fred's child, vanished. Her dismembered remains wouldn't be discovered until June 1994, buried in a field between Muchmarcle and Kempley. Her fingers and unborn child had been removed from her body. No one reported Anne missing at the time. Her disappearance marked the beginning of a murderous pattern that would continue for 2 decades, leaving at least 12 young women and girls dead, their bodies concealed beneath the floors and garden of what would become known as the House of Horrors. Early 1969, Fred West had already committed at least 1 murder. His temper was becoming more volatile. His daughter Anna Marie, now 5 years old, and stepdaughter Charmaine, age 6, lived in constant fear of his unpredictable rage. But the worst was yet to come. In early 1969, while waiting for a bus in Cheltenham, 27-year-old Fred spotted 15-year-old Rosemary Letts. Rose initially found Fred's unkempt appearance repulsive, but she quickly became flattered by his persistent attention when he continued to sit beside her at the bus stop in the following days. Rose's own childhood had been deeply troubled. Born on November 29, 1953, she grew up with a father, Bill Letts, who was a diagnosed schizophrenic and a violent disciplinarian. Her mother, Daisy, suffered from depression. Neighbors and schoolmates remembered Rose as having violent mood swings and attacking other children without provocation. Despite having twice refused Fred's requests for a date, Rose allowed him to walk her home. Fred discovered that although Rose had never had a boyfriend, she was promiscuous. He also played on her sympathy by falsely claiming he was a single father abandoned by his wife. Within days of their first meeting, Fred visited the bread shop where Rose worked. Through an elaborate setup involving another woman delivering a gift, he persuaded Rose to go on a date with him that evening. Rose soon began regularly visiting Fred at Lake House Caravan Park, becoming a willing childminder to Charmaine and Anna Marie, who she initially treated with care and affection. Within weeks, Rose left her job at the bread shop to become the girls' nanny full-time. Fred agreed to give her money to take home to her parents every Friday, creating the illusion she was still employed. When Rose introduced Fred to her family, her mother immediately recognized him as a pathological liar. Her father vehemently disapproved, threatening to call social services if the relationship continued. Rose's parents eventually did contact Gloucestershire Social Services about their 15-year-old daughter dating an older man and rumours she was engaging in prostitution at his caravan. In August 1969, authorities placed Rose in a home for troubled teenagers in Cheltenham, allowing her to leave only under controlled conditions. When permitted to visit her parents on weekends, Rose nearly always seized the opportunity to see Fred instead. When Rose turned 16 in November 1969, she left the home to move in with Fred in his Cheltenham flat, despite her father forbidding her from ever setting foot in his house again. In February 1970, police examined Rose and confirmed she was pregnant. Though authorities placed her back into care with instructions to terminate the pregnancy and return to her family, Rose chose instead to move back in with Fred. In June 1970, the couple relocated to a ground-floor flat at 25 Midland Road in Gloucester. On October 17, 1970, Rose gave birth to their first child together, a daughter named Heather Ann. 2 months later, Fred was imprisoned for theft of car tires and a vehicle tax disc, leaving 17-year-old Rose alone to care for baby Heather, Anna Marie, and Charmaine. It was during Fred's incarceration at Lay Hill Prison, which lasted until June 24, 1971, that one of the most disturbing chapters of the West saga unfolded. Rose, showing increasing resentment toward Charmaine, subjected Fred's daughters to severe physical and emotional abuse. Witnesses described seeing Charmaine standing on a chair, bound and gagged, while being beaten by Rose. Hospital records show Charmaine received treatment for a severe puncture wound to her left ankle in March 1971. Around June 15, 1971, shortly before Fred's release from prison, 8-year-old Charmaine disappeared. When neighbors or school officials inquired about the girl's whereabouts, Rose claimed that Rena had come and taken her daughter to live with her in Bristol or London. When Fred returned home on June 24, he allayed Anna Marie's concerns by telling her that her mother had collected Charmaine and returned to Scotland. When Anna Marie asked why her mother hadn't taken her too, Fred cruelly replied, "She wouldn't want you, love. You're the wrong color." In reality, Charmaine's body had been stored in the coal cellar of Midland Road until Fred returned. He then buried her naked body in the yard close to the back door. Later, forensic evidence would show her body had been severed at the hip, possibly during subsequent building work. In late August 1971, Rena West, concerned about her daughters, traveled to Midland Road to inquire about Charmaine and Anna Marie. This was the last time anyone saw Rena alive. Her extensively dismembered body was later found in Letterbox Field near Much Marcle, approximately 1 mile from Fred's childhood home. A short length of metal tubing was found with her remains, suggesting she had been restrained and sexually assaulted before being murdered by strangulation. On January 29, 1972, Fred and Rose married at Gloucester Register Office. Fred falsely described himself as a bachelor on the marriage certificate. Fred's brother John served as best man, and no other family or friends were invited. Several months after their wedding, with Rose pregnant with their second child, the Wests moved to 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester. This ordinary-looking 3-story house would become infamous in British criminal history. Initially rented from the council, Fred later purchased the property for £7,000. To help finance the purchase, Fred converted many of the upper floor rooms into bedsits for lodgers, installing a separate cooker and wash basin on the first-floor landing, so tenants wouldn't need to enter the family's ground-floor living area. Only the West family had access to the garden, for good reason. Shortly after giving birth to their second child, May-June, on June 1, 1972, Rose began working as a prostitute from an upstairs room at Cromwell Street. She advertised her services in local contact magazines, with Fred encouraging her to seek clients in Gloucester's West Indian community. The room she used for prostitution became known throughout the house as Teen Rose's room, complete with a red light outside the door and a private bar inside. Rose carried the only key to this room around her neck. Fred installed hidden peepholes in the wall and a baby monitor in the room, allowing him to watch and listen to Rose with her clients. The couple's sexual appetites were becoming increasingly sadistic, and they amassed a large collection of bondage equipment, pornographic magazines, and videos. In October 1972, Fred and Rose hired 17-year-old Caroline Owens as their children's nanny. They had picked her up while she was hitchhiking from Tewkesbury to her Cinderford home. Learning that Owens disliked her stepfather, the Wests offered her employment and accommodation. Within weeks, Owens became uncomfortable with the Wests' overt sexual advances. When she announced her intention to leave, the couple formulated a plan to abduct her. On December 6, 1972, they lured her into their car with apologies and the offer of a ride home. Once inside, Rose began fondling her as Fred questioned her about her sex life. When Owens protested, Fred stopped the car, punched her unconscious, and together with Rose, bound and gagged her with a scarf and duct tape. At Cromwell Street, they drugged her with tea, then subjected her to a prolonged sexual assault. Fred threatened to keep her locked in the cellar, allow his black friends to abuse her, and then bury her body beneath the paving stones of Gloucester. Terrified for her life, Owens agreed to return to work as their nanny. The next day, she escaped from a launderette she had entered with Rose. Upon seeing her daughter's bruises and cuts, Owens's mother reported the assault to police. Though Fred and Rose were arrested and charged with indecent assault, actual bodily harm and rape, the case tried at Gloucester Magistrates' Court on January 12, 1973, resulted only in £50 fines when Owens felt unable to face testifying in court. 3 months after this court appearance, the Wests committed their first known murder together. 19-year-old Linda Goff, who had become acquainted with the Wests through a male lodger, moved into 25 Cromwell Street on April 19, 1973. Days later, she vanished. When Goff's mother came to Cromwell Street inquiring about her daughter, she found Rose wearing Linda's clothes and slippers. Rose claimed Linda had moved to Weston-super-Mare for work. In reality, Linda had been murdered, her jaw wrapped in adhesive and surgical tape, with tubes inserted into her nasal cavities to allow breathing during torture. Her dismembered body, missing several bones, was buried in an inspection pit beneath the garage. On November 10, 1973, 15-year-old Carol Ann Cooper disappeared after spending the evening at a cinema with her boyfriend. She had been waiting for a bus in Warndon to return to the children's home where she lived. Fred later referred to her as Scar Hand, because of a recent firework burn she had sustained. Cooper's remains were discovered in the cellar of Cromwell Street, her skull bound with surgical tape, and her dismembered limbs tied with cord. The killing continued on December 27, 1973, when 21-year-old Lucy Partington, a university student and cousin of novelist Martin Amis, was abducted from a bus stop along the A435. Fred may have injured his hand dismembering her body, as hospital records show he sought treatment for a serious laceration on January 3, 1974. Her remains were discovered in the Cromwell Street cellar in March 1994. By April 1975, 4 more young women between the ages of 15 and 21 had been murdered. At 25 Cromwell Street, Therese Siegenthaler, a 21-year-old sociology student from Switzerland, Shirley Hubbard, a 15-year-old foster child, Juanita Mott, age 18, and 18-year-old Shirley Robinson, who was 8 months pregnant with Fred's child when she was killed in May 1978. Each victim had been extensively mutilated, and each body bore evidence of extreme sexual abuse prior to death. Many had been restrained, gagged, and subjected to various forms of torture before being strangled or suffocated. After the murders, Fred would dismember the bodies to make burial easier in the confined spaces of the cellar and garden. After killing Juanita Mott in April 1975, Fred concreted over the entire cellar floor and later converted this section of the house into a bedroom for his oldest children. The Wests then appear to have paused their murders until May 1978, when they killed Shirley Robinson, possibly because her pregnancy threatened the stability of their relationship. The final victim of their sexually motivated murders was 16-year-old Alison Chambers, who disappeared in August 1979. She had run away from a children's home and became acquainted with the Wests in mid-1979. Fred later claimed to his solicitor that Chambers had died as a result of Rose becoming too bloody vicious with her. While the murders were taking place at 25 Cromwell Street, an almost unbelievable facade of normal family life continued. Between 1970 and 1983, Rose gave birth to 8 children. Though Fred accepted all as his own, at least 3 were fathered by Rose's clients. When questioned about the darker skin tone of some of his children, Fred would explain that his great-grandmother had been a black woman. Behind closed doors, the West household operated under a regime of fear, sexual abuse, and violence. When each child reached the age of 7, they were assigned numerous daily chores. The children rarely socialized outside the home, unless accompanied by their parents, and had to follow strict guidelines with severe punishment, almost always physical, for failing to conform. Between 1972 and 1992, the West children were admitted to local hospital emergency departments 31 times with various injuries. These were always explained away as accidents, and no one reported their concerns to social services. The violence was sometimes irrational and indiscriminate. Rose inflicted most of the physical abuse, though she was careful never to mark the children's faces or hands. One particularly disturbing incident occurred when Stephen, one of the West children, was mopping the kitchen floor. Rose accidentally stepped into the water bowl he was using. In response, she hit him over the head with a bowl, then repeatedly kicked him in the head and chest while shouting, "Oh, did that on purpose, you little swine." Another time, Rose became furious about a missing kitchen utensil and grabbed a knife she had been using to cut meat. She repeatedly inflicted light scour marks on her daughter May's chest until her rib cage was covered with wounds. All the while May screamed, "No, no, Mum, no, Mum," as her siblings Stephen and Heather stood by helplessly sobbing. Even Fred occasionally became a victim of Rose's violence. In August 1974, Rose chased Fred with a carving knife. When he slammed a door to escape her, the knife embedded itself in the door, with 3 of Rose's fingers sliding down the blade, nearly severing them. Rose calmly wrapped her hand in a towel and said, "Look what you done, fella. You've got to take me to the hospital now." The sexual abuse in the household was equally horrific. In September 1972, Fred and Rose took 8-year-old Anna Marie to the cellar, where the child was forced to undress. Rose tore Anna Marie's dress from her body when she hesitated. The young girl was then restrained as Fred raped her, with Rose actively encouraging him. Afterward, Rose followed Anna Marie to the bathroom and handed her a sanitary towel, explaining, "I'm sorry, everybody does it to every girl. It's a father's job. Don't worry, and don't say anything to anybody." The Wests threatened severe beatings if Anna Marie ever revealed the abuse. From the age of 13, Fred and Rose forced Anna Marie to prostitute herself to clients within their home. Rose was always present during these encounters to ensure Anna Marie wouldn't reveal her true age. Clients were told she was 16, as Anna Marie got older and eventually ran away from home in 1979. Following a severe beating from Rose, Heather and May became the focus of Fred's incestuous sexual attention. The frequency of abuse increased when the girls reached puberty. Fred was overt about his behavior, justifying it by saying, "I made you, I can do what I like with you." He spoke openly about his intentions to impregnate both his daughters. The 3 siblings, Heather, May, and their younger brother Stephen, developed a system where they would only be alone with their father if at least one other sibling was present. The girls also created a routine where they would only shower or undress when their father was out of the house, or while a sister stood guard at the door. Stephen was informed by his father that he would have to have sex with his mother by the age of 17, though his parents evicted him when he was 16. May developed a mechanism to tolerate her father's advances, jokingly brushing aside his attempts to progress beyond fondling. Heather, however, was more severely affected by the abuse. By the mid-1980s, she displayed classic symptoms of a sexual abuse victim, biting her nails until they bled, drinking alcohol, watching her father warily from the corner of her eye, expressing nervous fragility around males, suffering from nightmares, and repeatedly bouncing back and forth while seated. This distressed behavior led Fred and Rose to suspect Heather had lesbian inclinations, resulting in her becoming the target of increased taunts from her father, who had never particularly liked her. When Heather complained to Rose about the abuse, her mother simply laughed at her distress. By the mid-1980s, rumors about Rose's prostitution had reached Heather's classmates. Though the West children were forbidden from discussing their home life, Heather confided to friends that many of these rumors were true. When one friend's father, who knew the Wests, informed Fred and Rose of Heather's disclosures, Fred became so concerned that he began escorting Heather to and from school. After leaving school in 1986, Heather applied for numerous jobs, desperately trying to escape her home. By June 1987, she had pinned her hopes on a job as a chalet cleaner at a holiday camp in Torquay. On June 18, she received notification that this application had been unsuccessful. That evening, her siblings heard Heather sobbing in her bedroom. The following morning, June 19th, when her siblings left for school, Heather was sitting on the couch and bouncing back and forth as she sat, and biting her nails. When they returned home, they were told Heather had left to accept the job in Torquay. Over time, the West's story changed. To neighbors, Rose said she and Heather had a hell of a row, and Heather had run away. To family members, they claimed Heather had eloped with a lesbian lover. When May and Stephen suggested reporting Heather's disappearance to police, Fred changed his story again, saying it would be unwise to search for Heather as she was involved in credit card fraud. The truth was far more sinister. Fred and Rose had murdered their 16-year-old daughter, likely because they considered her efforts to leave home a threat, especially given her knowledge of the abuse occurring at Cromwell Street. In the years that followed, Fred occasionally threatened the other children that they would end up under the patio like Heather, if they misbehaved or revealed family secrets. With Rose's approval, Fred constructed a barbecue pit immediately opposite, where Heather had been buried, and placed a pine table on her grave for family gatherings in the garden. The disappearance of their daughter, coupled with Fred's ominous references to her fate, would eventually lead to the investigation that uncovered all their crimes. The beginning of the end for Fred and Rose West came in May 1992. Fred asked his 13-year-old daughter Louise to bring some bottles to a room on the first floor of their home while Rose was out. Shortly afterward, Louise's siblings heard her scream, "No, don't!" When Fred returned downstairs, Louise was found sobbing that her father had raped and sodomized her, at one point partially strangling her. When Rose returned home, Louise told her mother about the assault. Rose's response was chillingly indifferent. "Tossa Noel. You were asking for it." Over the following weeks, Louise was raped 3 more times by Fred, with Rose witnessing one of these attacks before following her distressed daughter into the bathroom and asking, "Well, what did you expect?" Fred also filmed one of these rapes. Several weeks later, Louise confided in a close friend about what her father had done. This friend told her mother, who anonymously informed the police on August 4, 1992. On August 6, police searched the West household on the pretext of looking for stolen property. They discovered numerous items of sexual paraphernalia, including 99 pornographic videos, but did not find the video of Louise's rape. The 13-year-old gave a full statement through a trained solicitor, describing her father's actions, how the sexual abuse had begun when she was 11, and her mother's casual indifference to her plight. The following day, all the children in the household were placed in foster care. Medical examinations revealed evidence of physical and sexual abuse. During police questioning, the West children mentioned their father's frequent statement that anyone revealing family secrets would be anéanti and buried under the patio, like their sister Heather. Police began a full-scale investigation, eventually charging Fred with 3 counts of rape and 1 of buggery, with Rose as an accomplice. Rose was also charged with child cruelty, inciting her husband to engage in sex with their daughter, and obstructing police. The Wests were questioned about Heather's whereabouts, and though Fred claimed she was alive and well, and supporting herself through prostitution, Rose gave contradictory explanations about why her daughter had left home. On August 11, 1992, Rose was granted bail on the condition she not contact her children, her stepdaughter, or her husband prior to trial. Fred was held on remand in Birmingham. In June 1993, the case against the Wests collapsed when Anna Marie and Louise declined to testify. Despite this, all the younger children remained in foster care, though they were permitted supervised visits to Cromwell Street. Police continued investigating Heather's disappearance, finding no records with the Inland Revenue or Social Security Department to indicate she was still alive. By early 1994, concerns about Heather's fate led Gloucester Social Services to contact police again. On February 23, 1994, Gloucestershire Police successfully applied for a search warrant to look for Heather's remains at 25 Cromwell Street. The next day, when officers showed the warrant to Rose, she turned pale and became hysterical, shouting to her eldest son Stephen, "Kit Fred!" Fred was working in Stroud at the time. When he arrived home 3 hours later, he told police he would voluntarily provide a statement about his daughter's whereabouts, despite his insistence that Heather was alive and well, but involved with a drugs cartel. Police remained unconvinced. The following morning, February 25th, Fred abruptly changed his approach. He asked to be arrested for Heather's murder and taken to Bearland Police Station to provide a full confession. Once there, he admitted to strangling Heather in a fit of rage, then dismembering her body in the ground floor bathroom with a heavy serrated knife he normally used for cutting frozen meat. He claimed he had stored her remains in a dustbin until he could dig her grave. Fred insisted Rose knew nothing about their daughter's murder. claiming he had killed Heather while Rose was with a client. He also said the search team hadn't found Heather's remains because they were excavating the wrong section of the garden. Fred then volunteered to accompany police to pinpoint the exact location of Heather's body. On February 26, police began excavating the section of garden Fred had indicated. Around 4 p.m., officers found a human thigh bone protruding from an area Fred had insisted they need not search. Continuing their excavation, investigators discovered a mass of human remains encased in the remnants of a bin bag and intertwined with rope. Forensic examination identified the remains as those of a young woman with one kneecap and several finger bones missing. The body was later confirmed through dental records to be Heather West. That evening, when questioned about a third thigh bone found in the garden, Fred confessed that 2 more sets of human remains were buried there. He identified one victim as Shirley Robinson, a former tenant who had been pregnant with his child when he murdered her in 1978, but was vague about the identity of the third victim. Both sets of remains were discovered on February 28, and Fred was charged with these additional murders 2 days later. With 3 bodies now found, the police decided to thoroughly search the entire property. On March 4, Fred wrote a note to his solicitor stating, "I, Frederick West, authorize my solicitor, Howard Ogden, to advise Superintendent Bennett that I wish to admit a further, approx. 9 killings, expressly Charmaine, Rayner, Linda Goff, and others to be identified." Between March 5 and 8, police discovered 6 more bodies of young females at 25 Cromwell Street. 5 were found in the cellar, and a 6th beneath the ground floor bathroom. Each victim had been extensively mutilated, and each body showed evidence of extreme sexual abuse prior to death. Many of the remains were found with restraints still in place. One victim's skull was encased in adhesive tape, wrapped around 11 or 12 times, with a narrow plastic tube inserted where the nasal cavities had been to allow breathing before death. Throughout the excavations and his formal interviews, Fred maintained that Rose had no knowledge of any of the murders. However, investigators suspected otherwise. On April 20, 1994, Rose was arrested, initially on charges relating to the rape of an 11-year-old girl and the physical assault of an 8-year-old boy from the mid-1970s. She was refused bail and sent to Pucklechurch Prison's maximum security wing. Meanwhile, investigators continued their search for additional victims. Fred confessed to the murders of his first wife Rena and his stepdaughter Charmaine, as well as knowing the location of Anne McFall's remains, though he denied killing her. Between April 10 and June 7, these 3 additional bodies were unearthed at locations Fred identified. By May 6, 1994, Fred and Rose were jointly charged with 5 counts of murder. Rose responded to each charge by simply stating, "I'm innocent." By the end of June, Fred was charged with 12 murders and Rose with 9. On June 30, Fred and Rose were brought before a magistrate's court in Gloucester, their first time seeing each other since Fred's February arrest. When Fred tried to approach Rose, she visibly winced and turned away from him. The couple was ordered held on remand. While held at HM Prison Birmingham, Fred became increasingly depressed, especially after Rose's public rejection of him and her refusal to respond to his letters. Despite initially confessing to having acted alone in the murders, Fred began to change his story, accusing Rose of being culpable in almost all the killings except that of Anne McFall. On January 1, 1995, Fred West asphyxiated himself in his cell by constructing an improvised rope from a blanket and tags stolen from prison laundry bags. He tied this around his neck, then connected it to a door handle and window catchment before sinking to his knees. In his suicide note, Fred wrote, "In loving memory, Fred West, Rose West, rest in peace where no shadow falls. In perfect peace, he waits for Rose, his wife." Following Fred's suicide, Rose West stood trial alone. At pre-trial proceedings in February 1995, she pleaded not guilty to 10 charges of murder, the murder of Charmaine West having been added to the original 9 after Fred's death. Her trial at Winchester Crown Court began on October 3, 1995, before Mr. Justice Mantell, the judge made an important early decision to admit testimony relating to the sexual mistreatment of 3 women by Fred and Rose, accepting the prosecution's argument that it established a pattern of behavior repeated in the murders. In his opening statement, prosecutor Brian Levison portrayed the Wests as sex-obsessed sadistic murderers, describing how the victims' last moments on earth were as objects of the depravity of this woman and her husband. He highlighted that Fred was incarcerated when Charmaine was killed, that the Wests had learned from their mistake in allowing Caroline Owens to live, and pointed out feminine touches in the murders, such as the scarf tied in a bow used to gag victim Therese Siegenthaler. Prosecution witnesses included Cromwell Street lodgers, victims' relatives, Rose's mother Daisy and sister Glenys, and surviving victims including Anna Marie West, Caroline Owens, and others who had been sexually assaulted by the couple. Neighbors described Charmaine's 1971 disappearance while Fred was imprisoned and Rose's casual indifference to Heather's disappearance. Rose's defense counsel, Richard Ferguson, attempted to discredit prosecution witnesses and emphasized that Fred had committed at least one murder strikingly similar to those at issue before meeting Rose. He argued that Rose was unaware of the extent of Fred's sadism and urged the jury not to be prejudiced by her promiscuity and domineering manner. Against her lawyer's advice, Rose testified in her own defense. Her demeanor was inconsistent, sometimes tearful, sometimes joking inappropriately. She portrayed herself as a victim of child abuse and rape who had naively married a violent and domineering man. She claimed never to have met 6 of the victims buried at Cromwell Street and to recall very little of her assault on Caroline Owens. When shown photographs of the victims and asked if she recognized them, Rose's face turned bright red as she stuttered, "No, sir." Her testimony contained numerous contradictions with earlier witness statements about life at Cromwell Street and her relationship with her daughter Heather. The final witness was Janet Leach, Fred's appointed appropriate adult during police interviews. Leach testified that Fred had confided in her that he and Rose had formed a pact before his arrest, whereby he would take full responsibility for all the murders, many of which he privately described as a ton of Rose's mistakes. Fred had told her that Rose had murdered Charmaine and Shirley Robinson, and had played a major part in the other 8 murders for which Rose was charged. After 7 weeks of evidence, the jury deliberated on November 21st and 22nd, 1995, returning unanimous guilty verdicts on all 10 murder charges. Describing her crimes as appalling and depraved, Mr. Justice Mantell sentenced Rose to life imprisonment, emphasizing that she should never be paroled. In the aftermath, the house at 25 Cromwell Street was demolished in October 1996, with every piece of debris destroyed to discourage souvenir hunters. The site was later redeveloped into a public pathway. The 4 youngest West children were given new identities to protect them from the notoriety of their family. The remains of Charmaine and Raina were cremated together in Kettering at the insistence of Anna Marie West, who stipulated that no roses should be brought to the service. The trauma of the case continued to affect those connected to it. 2 weeks after testifying against her stepmother, Anna Marie attempted suicide. She tried again in 1999 by throwing herself from a bridge into the River Severn. Stephen West also attempted suicide in 2002 and was later jailed for having unlawful sex with a 14-year-old girl. Fred's brother John hanged himself in November 1996 while awaiting a jury verdict in his trial for the alleged multiple rapes of Anna Marie and another underage girl at Cromwell Street in the 1970s. Rose West initially announced her intention to appeal her sentence in March 1996, claiming extensive press coverage had rendered witness testimony unreliable and that no physical evidence linked her to the murders. This appeal was rejected. In July 1997, Home Secretary Jack Straw subjected Rose to a whole life tariff, effectively denying her any possibility of parole. In 2001, Rose abandoned further appeals, stating she would never feel free even if released. She continues to maintain her innocence from prison, where she is currently serving her sentence. She has ceased contact with most of her children, explaining, "And I was never a parent then, and could never be now." The case of Fred and Rose West remains one of Britain's most notorious criminal investigations, not only for the number of victims, but for the extreme depravity of the crimes and the facade of normal family life that concealed them for so many years. Their house at 25 Cromwell Street, known as the House of Horrors, has become a grim landmark in the history of British crime. Thank you for joining us for this disturbing yet important exploration of one of Britain's most notorious criminal cases. The West murders remind us of the absolute necessity of recognizing warning signs and reporting suspicious behavior, as many victims might have been saved if early concerns had been properly investigated. We at X by X Confidential appreciate your time and support in watching this documentary. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth criminal case investigations. What do you think was the most crucial missed opportunity that could have stopped the West sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.